Every night at exactly midnight, a small house at the edge of town began to sing. A former Navy SEAL thought it was a glitch until the power was cut and the song still played. His German Shepherd didn't bark or run. He stood guard as if protecting something unseen. Behind the walls was not a machine, but a promise meant to keep people safe in the dark. This is not a story about war, but about what soldiers and dogs do after the fighting ends. It's about quiet faith, second chances, and the courage to stay when others walk away. If this story touches you, please like, comment, and subscribe to help Silent Paws Steady Hearts reach its first 1,000 subscribers. Lucas Harrow arrived at the house just before dusk, when the northern sky still held a pale, thinning blue, and the air smelled faintly of pine and cold iron. The house sat at the far edge of town, modest and narrow, its wooden siding weathered but carefully kept, as if it had learned to endure without complaint. It was the kind of place people passed without noticing, a structure that did not ask to be admired. Lucas parked the truck, stepped out, and stood for a moment with his hands resting on his hips, letting the quiet settle into his bones. At 40, he carried himself with the economy of someone long trained not to waste movement. Tall, broad-shouldered, spine straight without effort. His skin was darkened by years of sun and wind, roughened slightly in texture, the kind that never fully softened again. His hair was cut short in a tactical military style, shaved close on the sides, the top kept neat and functional, dark brown threaded with early silver at the temples. A trimmed stubble followed the hard line of his jaw, precise, disciplined. His eyes, steel blue with a gray undertone, scanned the property the way they always did, not anxious, just awake. Bear stepped out after him, a full-grown German Shepherd with the calm mass of a working animal. 6 or 7 years old, maybe more, he moved with quiet assurance, paws landing softly on the gravel. His back was straight and strong, the black of his coat deep along his spine and shoulders, fading into warm tan along his chest and legs. His ears stood tall and alert, his dark amber eyes thoughtful rather than sharp. He wore a simple dark collar, nothing ornamental. Bear did not pull or pace. He simply stood beside Lucas, breathing evenly, as if measuring the place by scent and silence. Inside, the house was small but orderly. The floors were clean, the furniture sparse, each item placed with intention. There were no family photos, no clutter, no sense of a life lived loudly here. Lucas moved room to room with slow precision, checking windows, doors, corners. Old habit ingrained deeper than thought. The will lay folded on the kitchen counter, its thin paper already creased by his fingers. Margaret Hale's handwriting was neat and deliberate, the letters slightly slanted, steady even near the end. 3 instructions, no explanation. Do not remove the sound system. Do not alter the walls. If you hear the lullaby at midnight, let it play. Lucas had snorted quietly when he read it earlier, a brief exhale of dry humor. Everyone had their quirks, solitary people especially. He had known men who refused to sleep facing doors, others who would not eat with their backs unguarded. Compared to that, a midnight lullaby felt harmless. Night fell fully, bringing with it a deeper stillness. The town lights were distant, softened by trees and space. Lucas ate a simple meal, fed Bear, then sat in the living room with the lights low. His body relaxed into the chair, but his mind stayed upright, listening. Midnight came without ceremony. At exactly 12 o'clock, sound entered the house. It was not loud. It was not even clearly a song, just a fragile sequence of notes, thin and uneven, like someone humming under their breath. A children's lullaby, stripped down to its most basic shape. It drifted through the darkness for 5 seconds, no more, and then stopped. Lucas straightened instantly. His hand went to the light switch. The room brightened. He waited, breath controlled. Silence. He crossed to the breaker panel and flipped the main switch. The house went dark again. 5 seconds later, the sound returned, identical, calm, Impossible. Okay, he murmured, more to himself than to the room. Bear had not barked. He had not growled. Instead, the dog rose, walked past Lucas, and stopped at the far corner of the living room. There he turned and placed his body squarely between Lucas and the wall, standing still, head slightly lowered, ears relaxed but attentive. The posture was unmistakable, not defensive, not aggressive, guarding, as if there were something fragile behind him. That was the moment something cold slid along Lucas's spine. He approached the wall, careful, eyes narrowing. He pressed his palm against the wood paneling, solid. He tapped lightly, listening. No hollow echo, no give. Bear did not move, did not protest, only shifted his weight enough to remain between Lucas and the corner, eyes calm, trusting. Lucas backed away. His thoughts reorganized themselves with practiced speed. Hidden speakers, surveillance, someone testing occupancy. He pulled outlets, checked wiring, traced what he could find. The sound system was real, but it wasn't connected to the house's power. It had its own source, buried deeper than the visible structure. When the lullaby did not repeat again that night, Lucas sat awake until dawn. Morning brought ordinary life back into the world. He took Bear for a walk along the edge of town, the cold air sharp and clean. People noticed him. Not openly, not rudely, but with a hesitation that felt rehearsed. A woman watering her lawn paused too long. An older man at the mailbox studied him with interest that bordered on concern. Near the corner store, a middle-aged neighbor with a knit cap and tired eyes leaned closer than necessary. "You hear anything last night?" the man asked quietly, as if discussing the weather. Lucas met his gaze, expression neutral. "No?" The man nodded, but his relief, or disappointment, was unclear. He stepped back without another word. That afternoon, a folded piece of paper slid under the front door. No envelope, no name. The handwriting was blocky, urgent. "Don't turn it off. Don't ask questions. Don't let anyone know you're here." Lucas stared at the note for a long time. Bear sat beside him, tail resting on the floor, watching his face more than the paper. The house felt different now, less empty, as though it were holding its breath. That night, Lucas left the lights off. Midnight came again, precise as a held pulse. The lullaby played. 5 seconds, no more. Bear rose immediately and went to the same corner, the same position, as if responding to a signal older than the house itself. Lucas watched him, heart steady but alert. And for the first time, a thought surfaced that was not tactical, not defensive. This isn't about being watched. It was about being told something. He did not sleep much after that, but when dawn came, the house remained quiet, patient, unchanged. And Lucas understood, in a way that did not require proof or logic, that the place he had inherited was not empty because it had been abandoned. It was empty because it was waiting. By daylight, the house seemed almost embarrassed by the attention Lucas now gave it. Sunlight revealed nothing extraordinary, just a narrow wooden porch with steps worn smooth by time, a small kitchen that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and cold metal, walls painted a soft off-white that had yellowed gently with age. It was the kind of house that existed to be passed through rather than admired. Lucas moved through it slowly, sleeves rolled just enough to expose forearms marked by old scars and sun-darkened skin, touching door frames, windowsills, corners. He was not searching for beauty. He was searching for intention. Bear followed at a respectful distance, nails clicking softly on the floor, his body language relaxed but observant, tail low, ears alert. At night, the house became something else entirely. Not threatening, just awake. Lucas felt it most clearly in the silence before midnight, the way the air seemed to settle, as if bracing for a familiar ritual. When the lullaby came, always at the same precise minute, always lasting exactly 5 seconds, it no longer startled him. Instead, it drew his attention inward. 5 seconds was too deliberate to be accidental, too restrained to be sentimental. Someone had designed it to be brief on purpose, like a signal meant to be recognized rather than enjoyed. Bear's response confirmed it. The dog would rise from wherever he rested and move calmly to the same corner of the living room, posture steady, eyes soft, body forming a quiet barrier. Lucas began to understand that Bear was not guarding against danger. He was acknowledging safety. The days that followed brought subtle disturbances that chipped away at Lucas's initial skepticism. A shallow scratch appeared near the back door's lock, too light to be a break-in, too deliberate to be random. The mailbox lid hung open one morning, its contents disturbed but not stolen. Once, just after dusk, Lucas noticed a dark sedan parked at the far end of the street, engine idling, lights off. It pulled away the moment he looked directly at it. None of these things demanded immediate action, but together they formed a pattern Lucas recognized all too well. Pressure without confrontation, observation without contact. The call from the lawyer came on the third afternoon. The man introduced himself as Daniel Rook, his voice smooth and practiced, the kind that never rose or fell too sharply. Rook spoke quickly, politely, explaining that he represented a private client interested in acquiring properties on the outskirts of town. He complimented the house's location, its quiet potential, and offered a price that was generous enough to raise suspicion rather than gratitude. Lucas listened without interrupting, eyes fixed on Bear, who had positioned himself squarely between Lucas and the phone, as if the voice itself were something to be measured. "I'm not selling," Lucas said when the lawyer finished. There was a pause, brief but telling. Rook recovered quickly, his tone still courteous. He suggested Lucas take time to think, reminded him that opportunities like this did not linger, then ended the call with a practiced warmth that never reached sincerity. When the line went dead, Bear stepped closer to Lucas and leaned lightly against his leg, a gesture that was neither needy nor protective, just present. That evening, as the sky dimmed and the first stars appeared, a memory Lucas had kept carefully buried began to surface. It was not a full recollection, not yet, more like the edge of a photograph curling upward. Years ago, during a deployment that blurred into countless others, Lucas had been assigned to escort a civilian extraction. A woman and a child. No names were exchanged. There had been shouting somewhere far off, the echo of violence that never quite reached them. The woman had been thin, her face drawn tight with exhaustion and fear, her dark hair pulled back hastily, strands escaping around her temples. She carried the child pressed to her chest, whispering something over and over again. Not words, just a soft, broken tune. The child had stopped crying when she sang it. Lucas remembered the way the child's breathing had slowed, the way the woman's shoulders had dropped a fraction, as if that small sound were a shield she trusted more than any weapon. He remembered delivering them to a waiting vehicle, turning away before either of them could look back. It had been one of the few missions that ended quietly. No explosions, no aftermath to revisit. Or so he had believed. The realization came to him slowly, like a bruise surfacing hours after impact. The lullaby in the house was not just similar to the one from his memory. It was the same pattern, the same hesitant rise and fall, the same unfinished ending. The thought unsettled him more than any sign of surveillance ever could. He sat at the kitchen table long after dark, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, listening as midnight approached. When the lullaby played again, Bear did not simply move to his corner. Instead, the dog paused halfway across the room, head tilting slightly, ears shifting as if catching something Lucas could not. Then Bear turned, not toward the wall, but toward Lucas, and for a moment their eyes met. There was no urgency in the dog's expression, no warning, just a calm expectancy, as though he were asking a question without words. Lucas felt his throat tighten. The sound ended. Bear returned to his usual position, but the moment lingered, heavy and unresolved. That was when Lucas understood something essential. Bear was not reacting to the house. He was reacting to a state of being. The lullaby was not a trigger for vigilance. It was a signal of permission to rest, to stand down, to exist without bracing for harm. The dog had learned that language somewhere, sometime, and it had stayed with him. The next morning, Lucas took Bear deeper into town. He wanted to see who noticed them, who looked away. At a small diner near the main road, he ordered coffee and eggs, choosing a seat by the window. A waitress in her late 40s approached with practiced efficiency. She was of average height, sturdy rather than soft, her brown hair streaked with gray and pulled into a low ponytail. Her face bore the lines of someone who had learned to read people quickly and keep her opinions to herself. She smiled politely, but her eyes lingered on Bear with a flicker of recognition. "He's a good one," she said, nodding toward the dog as she poured coffee. "Real calm." Lucas inclined his head. "He knows when it's safe." The waitress paused, just briefly, then straightened and moved on without another word. From across the room, an older woman watched Lucas over the rim of her mug, curiosity and something like concern mingling in her gaze. The town, Lucas realized, was not ignorant. It was careful. That night, as snow began to fall lightly outside, Lucas returned to the house with a sense of inevitability settling in his chest. He did not check the locks as thoroughly as before. He did not turn on extra lights. When midnight came, the lullaby played its 5 seconds as faithfully as ever. Bear moved to his corner and lay down, resting his head on his paws, eyes half-lidded. Lucas stood in the center of the room, listening not just to the sound, but to the silence that followed it. The house did not feel empty anymore. It felt occupied by absence, shaped by the passage of people who had needed it and left something behind. Lucas understood now that this place was not merely shelter, it was memory, encoded and preserved. A signal that once meant safety and might again, and whether he wanted it or not, he had stepped into its rhythm. When the sound faded, Lucas did not move. He simply breathed, letting the moment settle, knowing with quiet certainty that the house had not revealed itself fully yet. It had only reminded him that some promises were not spoken aloud, and some memories refused to remain nameless. The storm arrived without drama, the way northern storms often did, quietly, decisively, sealing the world in white. By morning, the house was wrapped in snow up to the porch railings. The trees bowed under the weight of it. Lucas woke before dawn, as he always did, the lullaby from midnight still faintly echoing in his mind, not as sound, but as absence. Bear lay near the door, curled but alert, his breathing slow and even, the posture of a dog that trusted the space enough to rest fully. Lucas spent the morning clearing snow, the cold biting into his hands despite his gloves. The physical labor steadied him. Shoveling had a way of quieting thoughts, of reducing the world to motion and breath. When he stepped back inside, stomping snow from his boots, he noticed it. The smallest thing, barely perceptible if you weren't trained to see deviations. One of the wall panels in the living room, near the corner Bear always guarded, sat a fraction higher than the others. Not loose, not broken, just off. He crouched, running his fingers along the seam. The wood was old but well-maintained, the grain darkened with age. He pressed gently. It gave, just enough to confirm what instinct already knew. Bear rose and approached, standing close, his head lowered, nose almost touching the floor, eyes fixed on the panel. There was no excitement in him, no tension, only recognition. Lucas removed the panel carefully, revealing a narrow cavity in the wall. Inside, mounted with deliberate precision, sat a small battery-powered generator, compact and silent, wires neatly secured. Beneath it rested a worn leather notebook and a metal USB drive taped to the wood. The label on the drive was handwritten in black marker, the ink faded but legible. Safe. Lucas exhaled slowly. The room felt smaller now, heavier, as if the walls themselves were listening. He carried the items to the kitchen table, laying them out as one might handle artifacts rather than tools. The notebook smelled faintly of old paper and oil, the leather softened by years of handling. Bear followed and lay down at Lucas's feet, his chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed but attentive. Lucas plugged the USB into his laptop. A list of audio files appeared, each labeled with a date, some spanning years. He clicked the first. The lullaby played, identical in length and tone to the one that echoed through the house each night. 5 seconds, then silence. The next file followed immediately, this one layered with something else. A child's breathing. Shallow at first, then gradually slowing. And beneath it all, a woman's voice, barely above a whisper. "If you hear this," the voice said softly, steady despite the tremor beneath it, "it means tonight is safe. Stay inside. Keep the lights low." Lucas sat back, his chest tightening. Another file, another voice, different accent, same cadence of fear held in check. "If it's quiet," the woman said, breath hitching slightly, "you have to leave. Don't wait. Take only what you can carry." The pattern became clear as he listened, each recording a variation on the same message, spoken by different women, always careful, always calm, as if calm itself were armor. The lullaby was not comfort for its own sake. It was code, a signal agreed upon and passed along, designed to be recognized without explanation. Lucas opened the notebook next. The handwriting was Margaret Hale's, firm, disciplined, economical. Pages were filled with entries that looked meaningless at first glance. Strings of numbers, initials, short notes that read like fragments of prayer. But Lucas had spent enough time around encrypted communications to recognize structure beneath the simplicity. Each line corresponded to a date, each date to a family. Names were absent by design. He understood then, fully, what the house had been. A safe house. One node in a network built not on technology or money, but on trust and silence. Margaret had not lived here alone. She had lived here between people, carrying them briefly, carefully, before sending them on. Lucas leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The pieces aligned with a clarity that made his pulse slow rather than spike. The lullaby's length, 5 seconds, was intentional. Long enough to be recognized by someone waiting for it, short enough to vanish before it could be traced. The generator's battery would never support sustained sound, only a brief pulse. Everything about the system was designed for survival, not comfort. Bear stirred when Lucas replayed one of the recordings, lifting his head and padding closer. As the lullaby played again, Bear lowered his head until his forehead touched the floor, resting there, unmoving. It was not obedience. It was memory. Lucas watched the dog's body relax, the tension easing from his shoulders, and something in Lucas's chest gave way. This wasn't coincidence. Bear had been here before, or somewhere like it. Lucas's mind returned, unbidden, to the extraction years ago. The woman's face surfaced more clearly now, pale skin stretched thin, dark circles beneath her eyes, her mouth set in determination rather than despair. She had thanked him without words, pressing her forehead briefly to the child's hair as the lullaby trailed off. He had never asked where they were going. He had assumed it was none of his business. He had been wrong. The realization that Margaret had chosen him, not by name but by memory, settled heavily. She had remembered the man who did not ask questions, who did not demand explanations or gratitude. The man who understood that safety sometimes required silence. Lucas felt a familiar ache bloom behind his ribs, the kind that came with understanding responsibility too late. A knock at the door broke the moment cleanly. Lucas stood at once, signaling Bear to stay. He moved to the window, peering through a narrow gap in the curtain. Outside stood a woman he did not recognize, bundled against the cold. She appeared to be in her early 40s, of average height, her posture slightly hunched from years of bracing against winter winds. Her coat was plain and practical, her dark hair tucked into a knit cap, a few strands escaping to frame a face marked by caution more than age. She did not look threatening. She looked tired. Lucas opened the door only as far as necessary. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, voice soft but steady. "I'm Anna. I live 2 houses down." Her eyes flicked briefly past Lucas's shoulder, then back to his face. "I just wanted to say, Margaret would have been glad it was you." Lucas studied her. "You knew her?" Anna nodded. "Enough." She hesitated, then added, "She helped people, quietly." Bear appeared behind Lucas then, standing close, his presence solid and unmistakable. Anna's gaze dropped to the dog, and her shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. "He's a good sign," she said. Lucas did not respond. He didn't need to. That night, after Anna left and the house returned to its hush, Lucas sat alone in the living room, the notebook open on the table, the USB drive beside it. The snow outside reflected moonlight, bathing the room in pale silver. Midnight came. The lullaby played. Bear moved to the corner and lay down, his head resting against the wall itself, as if listening not to the sound but to what it promised. Lucas remained where he was, eyes closed, letting the weight of knowledge settle. The house was no longer a mystery to solve. It was a charge to accept. Margaret Hale had not given him a home. She had given him a continuation, and for the first time since he'd crossed that threshold, Lucas understood that the wall behind the wood was not hiding a secret meant to be uncovered. It was preserving a vow meant to be kept. Lucas did not begin his investigation with documents or phone calls. He began by standing in the snow behind the house, where the ground dipped slightly toward the tree line, and asking himself a simple question. If someone wanted this place gone, how would they start? The answer came easily, quietly, with pressure, not force, with enough discomfort that leaving felt like relief. He had seen the pattern before, dressed up as bureaucracy or concern, always wearing a polite face. Margaret Hale's death had been ruled an accident. A single-car incident on a rural road slick with ice, her vehicle found off the shoulder, engine cold by the time help arrived. On paper, it made sense. Margaret had been in her late 70s, lived alone, drove old roads without complaint. But Lucas had learned long ago that plausibility was not proof. He requested the report from the county office, standing patiently while a clerk thumbed through folders. The clerk was a young man with tired eyes and a beard that looked more like neglect than style. He handed over copies without comment, but his fingers lingered a fraction too long on the papers, as if he wanted to say something and could not. Back at the house, Lucas read slowly. No skid marks, no witnesses, no signs of mechanical failure. Nothing wrong enough to raise alarms, nothing clean enough to erase doubt. Bear lay nearby, stretched along the floor, eyes following Lucas's movements. When Lucas paused at a particular line in the report, Bear lifted his head, ears angling forward. Lucas had not spoken aloud, but the dog reacted anyway. That afternoon, Lucas drove into town to meet Evelyn Moore. She worked out of a modest brick building near the courthouse, the kind that housed nonprofits and quietly underfunded offices. Evelyn met him in the lobby, offering a hand that was warm and steady. She was in her early 40s, of average height, her posture relaxed but alert. Her hair, a soft chestnut brown, was pulled back loosely, strands escaping around her face. She wore simple clothes, a knit sweater, dark jeans, boots built for walking rather than display. Her skin held the pale warmth of someone accustomed to northern winters, and her eyes, a calm hazel, carried the practiced attentiveness of a woman who had learned to listen without flinching. They sat across from each other in a small office that smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Evelyn spoke first, her voice even. "Margaret trusted you," she said. "She didn't trust easily." Lucas nodded. "I didn't know her." Evelyn offered a small smile, not unkind. "She knew you, in the way that mattered." She explained her work without embellishment. Social services, crisis relocation, long nights and careful planning. She and Margaret had worked together for over a decade, coordinating safe transitions for women and children escaping violent homes.
Most of the houses were no longer active. Some had been sold, some repurposed. A few, very few, had been kept dormant, maintained quietly, just in case. Just in case of what? Lucas asked.
Evelyn hesitated, fingers tightening briefly around her mug. Just in case someone needed to disappear without warning. She told him about the upcoming trials. Several cases, all connected by a familiar thread. An abuser with resources, influence, and a long memory. One man in particular had resurfaced, his name appearing in multiple files. He'd served time, briefly. Now he was free and angry and well-funded. Witnesses who had once vanished were being called back to testify. Safe houses, even old ones, were liabilities. They want the map erased, Evelyn said quietly. Every place that ever meant safety. Lucas thought of the call from Daniel Rook, the offer to buy the house, the timing. The lawyer, Lucas said. He's part of it. Evelyn did not argue. She simply nodded. The pressure escalated quickly after that. A formal letter arrived, citing zoning concerns and safety inspections. Another followed, warning of legal consequences should Lucas fail to comply. He noticed the same sedan again, parked closer this time, the driver never visible. Once, late at night, Bear growled low in his throat, a sound so rare it snapped Lucas fully awake. Lucas checked the perimeter, but found nothing disturbed. Still, Bear did not leave the front door afterward. He slept there each night, body aligned with the threshold, head lifted at the smallest sound. Evelyn came by the house a few days later, bringing coffee and a quiet urgency. She stood in the living room, hands tucked into her coat pockets, taking in the space with a familiarity that surprised Lucas. This house saved lives, she said. It still could, but that means risk. She advised him to sell, to take the money, leave town, let the system handle what remained. Her voice was practical, but her eyes betrayed concern not for the mission, but for him. This isn't your war, she said gently. Lucas looked at Bear, at the corner of the wall, at the notebook resting on the table. He thought of the women's voices on the recordings, steady despite fear. He thought of the lullaby, 5 seconds of permission to breathe. It never is, he said, until it is. That night, something changed. Lucas woke before midnight, heart already beating faster than usual. The air felt wrong, not heavy, but tense, like a held breath stretched too long. Bear stood at the front door, muscles taut, ears angled sharply forward. The dog did not bark. He did not growl. He waited. When the lullaby played, it was the same as always, 5 seconds, unbroken. But Bear did not move to his corner. Instead, he turned his head slightly, listening, then stepped back from the door and looked at Lucas. His eyes were alert, questioning. The sound ended. Bear returned to the door and lay down again, but the message had landed. Lucas understood. The system was being tested. Not shut down, tested. Someone wanted to see what he would do. The following morning, Lucas found fresh footprints near the back fence. They led nowhere obvious, but they were new, purposeful. He photographed them, documented everything, sending copies to Evelyn. She responded quickly, urging caution. "You're being measured," she wrote. "They want to know if you'll flinch." Lucas did not reply. He spent the day reinforcing locks, setting discreet cameras, moving with deliberate calm. Bear followed him, attentive, occasionally pressing close, as if grounding him. That evening, Lucas sat alone in the living room, lights dim, the house wrapped in quiet. He thought of Margaret Hale, of the way she must have lived with this pressure, this knowledge, year after year. He understood now why she had chosen silence over safety, preparation over comfort. She had not been reckless, she had been resolved. When midnight came, the lullaby played again. Bear moved to the door and lay down, fully at ease, his trust unshaken. Lucas watched him, feeling the shift inside himself settle into place. The hesitation was gone. The doubt had burned off, leaving something clear and steady behind it. For the first time since inheriting the house, Lucas did not feel like a temporary occupant. He felt like a sentinel. Not a hero, not a savior, just someone willing to stand where others had once stood and hold the line without needing recognition. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing tracks, smoothing edges. Inside, the house breathed quietly, its rhythm unchanged. And Lucas understood that whatever came next, it would not begin with violence. It would begin with patience. The bond between Lucas and Evelyn did not announce itself. It formed the way frost does on a window, slowly, invisibly, until one morning you realize the glass no longer feels bare. She began coming by the house in the afternoons, never unannounced, never lingering longer than necessary. Sometimes she brought folders from her office, sometimes groceries, once a bag of dog treats that Bear accepted with solemn dignity. There was no flirtation, no attempt to name what was growing between them. What passed instead was recognition. Two people who had learned, in different ways, how to carry other people's fear without letting it hollow them out. Evelyn moved through the house with quiet respect. She did not touch the walls where the system was hidden, did not ask to hear the recordings again. When she spoke of the past, it was always about others, the women, the children. She described them carefully, as if each deserved to be remembered intact. One boy, no more than 7, who refused to sleep unless someone sat beside him and counted his breaths. A girl with a scar along her forearm who memorized the lullaby after hearing it once and hummed it under her breath whenever the world felt too loud. Evelyn's voice never softened into sentimentality. It remained steady, practical, but there was warmth beneath it, like embers banked low. Lucas listened. He was good at that. He watched the way Evelyn's hands moved when she spoke, how she folded and unfolded her fingers when a memory pressed too close. He noticed the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, earned not by age, but by attention. She had the look of someone who had learned that caring did not require noise. One evening, as the light faded early and snow whispered against the windows, Lucas found himself speaking without planning to. He told her about the mission he rarely revisited, the one that did not end the way it should have. His voice remained level as he described the approach, the delay, the moment when the call came through that they were too late. A few minutes, that was all it had taken. A child left behind in the confusion. No name, no face he could bring into focus, just the weight of absence. "I didn't fail because I wasn't skilled," Lucas said, staring at the floor. "I failed because time didn't bend." Evelyn did not interrupt. She did not rush to absolve him. When she spoke, it was only to say, "That's the hardest kind of loss to live with." The lullaby, Lucas realized, had become a stand-in for that moment. 5 seconds of sound that represented everything that should have happened and did not. A promise delayed but not erased. He understood now why it affected him the way it did, why it pressed against something raw but necessary. Bear watched the exchange from his usual place, head resting on his paws, eyes tracking Lucas more than Evelyn. The dog's presence was constant, grounding. When Lucas fell silent, Bear rose and padded over, leaning his weight gently against Lucas's leg. It was not reassurance, it was acknowledgement. The lighter moments came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Lucas attempted to redirect Bear away from the corner of the living room, coaxing him with treats and a firm tone. Bear obeyed for exactly 3 steps, then stopped and sat, head tilted, eyes calm and resolute. Lucas sighed. "You're stubborn," he said. Bear's tail thumped once against the floor, slow and deliberate, as if conceding the point without apology. Evelyn laughed then, a soft sound, surprised out of her. "He's not guarding the house," she said, watching the dog settle back into place. "He's guarding what it stands for." That observation stayed with Lucas. He spent the following days repairing what he could: loose floorboards, a sagging porch rail, a leaky faucet. He worked with care, avoiding the walls that held the system, respecting the boundary as if it were sacred. The house responded, or perhaps it simply allowed itself to be tended. Either way, Lucas felt the decision forming beneath the surface of his thoughts. Not yet spoken, not yet final. The moment that crystallized it came unexpectedly. Late one night, well before midnight, Bear stirred from sleep and stood abruptly. His ears angled forward, his body tense but not alarmed. Lucas sat up, heart rate quickening, scanning the room. There was no sound, no movement outside. Then Bear did something he had never done before. He walked to the corner, pressed his nose to the wall, and let out a low, almost inaudible whine. It was not distress, it was anticipation. Lucas followed, placing his hand against the wood. He felt nothing unusual, but the dog remained there, breathing steadily, eyes fixed. When midnight arrived, the lullaby played as always, 5 seconds, unchanged. Bear relaxed instantly, the tension draining from his body as if a switch had been flipped. Lucas stepped back, pulse slowing. The realization hit him with quiet force. Bear had known the sound was coming, not by the clock, but by the absence that preceded it. The dog was reading the space between moments, the same way trained men read silence before impact. The house was not just reactive, it was anticipatory. Lucas sat down hard in a chair, breath leaving him in a long exhale. He understood now that the system was not merely a relic. It was active in a way that transcended mechanics. Not mystical, intentional, designed to be felt as much as heard. The next morning, Evelyn arrived early, her coat dusted with snow. Lucas told her what had happened, choosing his words carefully, grounding them in observation rather than interpretation. Evelyn listened, her expression thoughtful. "It means the system still matters," she said finally. "It's still part of someone's sense of safety." Lucas nodded. "Then it can't disappear." Evelyn met his gaze. There was concern there, but also relief. "If you stay," she said, "you become part of it. Permanently." Lucas looked around the room, the repaired boards, the quiet corner, the dog resting easily. He thought of Margaret Hale, of the lives that had passed through these walls, of the child he had never reached in time. "I already am," he said. That night, as snow continued to fall and the house settled into its familiar hush, Lucas felt something he had not allowed himself in years. Not peace, not resolution, but alignment. The sense that he was standing where he was meant to stand, doing what he was meant to do, without needing permission. When the lullaby played, Bear did not move immediately. He waited until the sound ended, then lay down with a contented sigh, his trust complete. Lucas watched him, understanding that some bonds did not require words, and some decisions did not need to be declared. The house would not vanish. Not while he was there. The power went out just after dusk, without warning and without ceremony. One moment the street lights beyond the trees glowed their familiar amber, and the next the world folded into darkness so complete it felt deliberate. Snow was falling hard by then, thick flakes muting sound and swallowing distance. Lucas stood at the living room window, watching the blackness settle, every sense quietly alert. A neighborhood outage was not unusual in winter, but instinct told him this one had been timed, not triggered by weather. Bear reacted before Lucas finished the thought. The dog rose from his resting place and moved to the front door, positioning himself squarely in front of it. His posture was tall and grounded, weight evenly distributed, ears forward but relaxed. He did not growl or bark. He simply became present in a way that filled the room. Lucas recognized the stance immediately. It was not confrontation, it was declaration. Lucas moved methodically, switching on a small battery lantern and checking the monitors he had installed days earlier. The cameras came online one by one, their feeds grainy but functional. Outside, the snow blurred outlines and erased depth, but movement still registered. A figure passed briefly along the far fence line, then another nearer the road. They stayed just outside the pool of visibility, careful not to approach too closely, careful not to leave obvious tracks. It was restraint practiced through experience. He did not reach for a weapon. He reached for his phone. "Stay off the roads," Evelyn said when she answered, her voice low but steady. "We lost power too. This isn't weather." "I know," Lucas replied. "They're checking the house." There was a pause, then Evelyn exhaled slowly. "I'll call it in. Not local, federal. The timing matters." Lucas ended the call and returned his attention to the screens. The figures outside shifted positions, slow and patient. Whoever they were waiting for something. A failure. A silence. Midnight approached like a held breath. The house felt different in the dark, its usual quiet sharpened into something expectant. Lucas sat in the chair near the center of the room, lantern casting soft light across the walls. Bear did not move from the door. His eyes never left the space beyond it, though his breathing remained calm, unhurried. Snow brushed against the windows, the sound faint and rhythmic. When the clock reached 12 o'clock, nothing happened. 1 second passed, then another. Lucas felt his pulse quicken, not with fear, but with recognition of the moment's weight. Outside, one of the figures shifted, stepping closer, anticipation evident even through the blur. At exactly 5 seconds past midnight, the lullaby began. It was as gentle as ever, thin and unfinished, drifting through the house like a promise kept under pressure. 5 seconds, no more, no less. When it ended, the silence that followed felt profound, as if the house itself had spoken and withdrawn. Bear exhaled softly, the tension leaving his body in a visible wave. He did not move from the door, but his stance eased, confidence unshaken. Lucas glanced at the monitors. Outside, the figures froze. One stepped back. Another turned his head as if listening, then retreated into the snowfall. Within moments, the screens showed nothing but empty white. Lucas recorded everything, tagging timestamps, backing up files. He did not pursue. He did not announce himself. He waited. By morning, power was restored. The streetlights flickered back on, and the town returned to its careful normalcy. Snowplows passed, erasing tracks and evidence alike. Evelyn arrived shortly after, her coat dusted white, her expression focused but relieved. "They tried to force a failure," she said once Lucas had shown her the footage. "They needed proof the system was dead." "And now they know it isn't," Lucas replied. She nodded. "Which means they've overplayed their hand." The response came swiftly. Investigators contacted Lucas within hours, their questions precise, their interest sharpened by the combination of archived recordings, encrypted notebooks, and fresh video evidence. Margaret Hale's old files were pulled from storage. Patterns emerged. Names surfaced. The lawyer, Daniel Rook, was no longer merely persistent, he was implicated. Charges followed: obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, conspiracy. The house was no longer invisible. That night, with the power steady and the snow easing into silence, Lucas sat once more in the dim living room. Midnight came, as it always did. The lullaby played, unbroken and unchanged. Bear moved from the door to his corner and lay down, head resting against the wall, eyes half closed in quiet certainty. Nothing had been taken from the house. Nothing had been silenced. For 5 seconds, in the deepest dark, the promise held. Spring came quietly to the northern town, as if unsure whether it was welcome after the winter it had taken. Snow receded from the edges of the road first, leaving behind dark soil and the faint smell of thawing earth. The town returned to its routines with practiced ease. Windows reopened, children reappeared on sidewalks, people spoke again without lowering their voices. On the surface, everything looked the same. But the house at the edge of town was no longer just another structure people passed without noticing. It had acquired weight, not in rumor or fear, but in meaning. Lucas Harrow stayed. The decision did not arrive all at once, nor did it feel heroic. It settled into him gradually, the way long-held tension sometimes releases not in relief, but in certainty. He declined the offers that came wrapped in institutional language, proposals from large organizations that promised funding, staff, visibility. They wanted to turn the house into something efficient, scalable, labeled. Lucas listened politely and said no. The house had never been about scale. It had been about presence. Evelyn Moore understood immediately. She stood with Lucas on the porch one afternoon, the air cool but no longer biting, her coat unbuttoned, hair pulled back loosely. She had brought folders, permits, carefully prepared documents that turned the house from an unofficial refuge into something quietly legitimate. No signage, no announcements, just the necessary approvals to protect it from being erased again. "It will exist on paper," she said, tapping one of the forms, "so it can keep existing in real life." Lucas nodded. He trusted her judgment. Evelyn had always known how to walk the line between visibility and safety. Her work had shaped her into someone who believed in systems only when they served people, never the other way around. The system inside the house remained untouched. Lucas repaired the roof, replaced warped boards, insulated windows. He upgraded what weather and time demanded. But the walls stayed closed. The speakers remained buried. The generator stayed exactly where Margaret Hale had placed it. No enhancements, no improvements. The lullaby did not need to be louder, clearer, or longer. Its restraint was its strength. Every night, without fail, at exactly midnight, the sound played. 5 seconds. Lucas no longer waited for it with apprehension. He acknowledged it the way one acknowledges a familiar bell or a steady clock. Bear did the same. The dog was older now. His muzzle had grayed, the black fading into silver. His movements were slower, more deliberate. He slept more, rose with less urgency. But when the lullaby played, Bear always lifted his head. Always. His ears would tilt slightly forward, his eyes opening just enough to register the sound before easing closed again. Lucas noticed everything about that moment. The way Bear's breathing evened, the way his tail rested motionless, the way the house seemed to exhale once the sound ended. It was not ritual for ritual's sake. It was confirmation. There were no more people running through the night. No women arriving with bags packed in haste. No children pressed into corners, counting breaths. The need for that kind of escape had, for now, passed. The town was quiet in a way that felt earned rather than imposed, and still the lullaby played. One evening, months after the trials concluded and the headlines faded, Evelyn stayed late. They sat at the kitchen table, cups of tea cooling between them, the windows open to the sound of insects and distant wind through trees. The conversation drifted easily, touching on work, on small-town frustrations, on memories that no longer demanded careful handling. "Do you ever think about turning it off?" Evelyn asked, her tone gentle, curious rather than challenging. Lucas considered the question honestly. "No," he said. "I think about why it's still on." Evelyn smiled, understanding more than he had said. "Some people will never hear it," she said. "And some people will never need to." Lucas leaned back in his chair, gaze drifting toward the living room. "It's not for them." After Evelyn left, Lucas walked the perimeter of the house, a habit he had not entirely broken. The night was clear, the sky crowded with stars. He stopped near the back fence, resting his hands on the wood, feeling the quiet settle around him. This place had once been a threshold between fear and safety. Now it was something else entirely. It was a promise kept even when no one was listening. The moment that stayed with him most came unexpectedly, on a cold evening when winter threatened to return. Lucas was half asleep in his chair when Bear stirred. The dog did not stand. He did not move toward the door or the corner. He simply lifted his head and looked at Lucas, eyes clear and steady. Midnight had not arrived yet. Lucas checked the clock. 2 minutes to go. Bear held his gaze, then slowly lowered his head again, resting his chin on his paws. When the lullaby played, right on time, Bear did not react at all. He did not need to. The trust was complete. Lucas felt something loosen in his chest, something he had carried without noticing. He realized then that the lullaby was no longer about vigilance. It was about continuity, a thread unbroken by use or neglect. Years passed in small, ordinary ways. Bear's steps shortened, his hearing dulled. He slept in patches of sunlight near the window, but every night, when the sound came, he would lift his head, just enough. Lucas aged too. His hair silvered further, the lines in his face deepened, but his posture remained steady, his presence unchanged. The house endured. Sometimes Lucas imagined the women who had once waited within these walls. He wondered where they were now, what their lives had become, whether any of them still remembered the sound, or if it had faded into something they could no longer name. He hoped they slept without listening for danger. He hoped they never needed the lullaby again. And yet, he was glad it remained. Because the sound was not just for those who had been here, it was for anyone who needed to know that somewhere, someone had stayed. On the coldest night of the year, snow falling thick and silent, Lucas stood at the front window and watched the world soften. Midnight came. The lullaby played. 5 seconds. Bear lifted his head, old eyes bright, then rested it back down, satisfied. Lucas did not move. He did not need to. The house stood quiet and unassuming against the white, its lights low, its walls intact. It did not announce itself. It did not demand remembrance. It simply existed, holding space the way it always had. Not as a fortress, not as a monument, but as a small, steadfast assurance that even in the longest night, something gentle could still keep watch. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or light. They arrive quietly, like a sound so small you could miss it if you were not listening. In this story, the house did not save people by force. It did not shout. It did not fight. It simply stayed awake when others were afraid to sleep. Many of us wait for God to change our lives in loud ways, but often His work appears in the steady things. A place that remains safe, a hand that does not let go, a presence that stands watch in the dark. Perhaps you have never heard a lullaby at midnight, but maybe you have felt it in another way. In the moment you realized you were not alone, in the night that passed without harm, in the quiet strength that carried you through when no one else knew. Faith is not always about being rescued. Sometimes it is about becoming someone who stays, someone who keeps the light on, someone who chooses to protect peace even when the world no longer asks for it. If this story spoke to you, consider sharing it with someone who may need to be reminded that goodness still watches. Leave a comment and tell us what gives you peace in difficult nights. And if you find comfort in stories like this, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing them with you. May God bless you and keep you safe. May He grant you rest when you are tired, courage when you are afraid, and quiet hope when the night feels long. And may you always remember that even the smallest light can be a miracle when it refuses to go out.